Before we fully get into the video, let me go ahead and take a second to introduce a name that should be no stranger to this channel, Only Crits, and their new Kickstarter. The Class Dice. Each pastel sharp edge set is crafted to perfectly match one of the 12 iconic D&D 5e classes. From the Paladin to the enigmatic Warlock, these dice embody the spirit of your favorite characters. And let's not forget the unique class-specific icons, precision-engineered edges, and, well, they're meant to roll well. Well, okay, they're not balanced. I'm not saying they're weighted. They roll well. They are built to roll at a proper... I'm moving on. For the first time ever, Only Crits is offering 11-piece sets. That means you get 4 d6s, 2 d20s, and all the classics. If you have a rogue who's struggling to roll their sneak attack dice, well, there you go. You can already have all the sneak attack dice there, ready, and on a rogue-based class set. And I do know it's a common issue when Kickstarters are mentioned that it's a little bit of a gamble. You don't know if things are going to go well. However, let me reassure you, this is definitely not Only Crits' first rodeo, and it's also by far not my first rodeo with them. Their last campaign was fully funded in just under 32 minutes, and every single early bird reward was gone within a single day. They have a proven track record. You can trust them to deliver, and they have delivered to me time and time again, and have been one of the best channel partners we could have ever asked for. Trust me, you don't want to miss out, because let's be honest, your character deserves the best. And so do you. The Kickstarter only has 5 days left to go, and there are still 3 classes left unlocked. The Bard, the Druid, and the Sorcerer. I would be so sad if any of those classes got left out, especially because the Druid is just, I love the look of it. So if we can go and get all of this funded before the Kickstarter ends, I'd be absolutely thrilled. Anyways, back to the video. So recently I watched a video from another channel that really got my brain churning when it came to combat encounters in the games that we, run. See, I genuinely believe somewhere around 90% of TTRPGs that feel as if combat is uninspiring all do so because of one core issue. The combat just doesn't do enough. Sure, it lets you roll dice. Sure, it lets you see cool monsters. But in the grand scheme of things, what does this combat tell us as the players and an audience? Confused? Let me explain. A combat encounter should do 3 things, in my experience. 1, it should challenge the players in a fun but mechanical way. 2, it should provide a change of pace within the session structure. And 3, it should progress the story. Much like any media, a fight for fight's sake is the equivalent of junk food. Empty calories. They might seem satisfying for the moment, but the truth is, they don't last. Don't stick with you in any way, honestly. And most of all, they don't feel satisfying because nothing came out of it in the first place. Therefore, combat should have a purpose. It doesn't always have to be some moral quandary or some highly intense fight to the death, and in fact, I encourage you not to do that every time. But it should progress the story by always giving your players some information about the world that they did not have before. And how do we do this? Well, the video I initially watched that got me thinking about this was Mystic Arts DM's video. D&D has 8 types of combat, actually.
Are your D&D combats beginning to feel like a chore? Or are they maybe beginning to feel identical? Your issue might be variety.
Now, beyond just being a well-made video, it also introduced me to this up-and-coming channel. And guys, for real, please go check them out. Their stuff blows mine out of the water 100 times over. The fact that I have more subs than them is legitimately a crime. And also, they were super nice to me when I reached out and asked if they could use, or if I could use their video in this. So, thanks, guys. Anyways, as they say in their video,
I find it helpful to consider D&D combat encounters as various categories, each with different functions and virtues. When a DM shuffles these categories in a sufficient manner, combat never gets repetitive.
They then go and categorize combat into 8 distinct types, each with its own flavor and purpose. And I like to expand on that purpose further and go into more of the narrative sense and give a real good example of exactly how each of these types of combats does more than just add variety. It genuinely tells a story in a way that makes it so much more interesting, and so that every new encounter really is engaging your players in a way you never could have imagined. So let's talk about it. Mystic Arts starts with the bread and butter of D&D, the skirmish. It's reliable, fun, and according to them, often overused, which I kind of agree.
I think of the skirmish as D&D's most common type of encounter. It's never inappropriate, it's reliable, and it's good fun. And for those same reasons, it's very popular and probably overused.
As our friends point out, what makes fights good is the stories that they tell.
In my opinion, what makes fights good is the stories they tell. Not just in D&D, but in any media. We tend to become interested in fight scenes in movies and television when we're invested. Usually, this investment is brought on by convincing us, the audience, that our heroes are in fatal danger. But that's not the only way. You can become invested in lots of ways.
Even a straightforward skirmish can become memorable if you tie it to a larger narrative. Now, the way that Mystic suggests is we make the skirmish more interesting by changing what type of combat encounter it is. And this is true, but even the most basic of skirmishes have a very specific strength. They tell the players about what is happening in the world. If goblins have attacked, as the GM, you have to ask yourself why. Is this a scouting party? Were they foraging for food? Did they come with the intention to attack the party? This then challenges and changes the encounter. If they were a scouting party, they are likely just as surprised as the party and attempting to escape to go get reinforcements. They're foraging for food, they likely have few weapons, and you should emphasize to the players how clearly outmatched the goblins are and that they know this fact. Now take the time to emphasize this information when the goblins take their turns. Highlight their actions and motivations. Goblins scrambling to escape, clutching crude foraging tools, or desperately trying to protect their meager food stash. This way the players receive more information about the story while also engaging with the combat encounter. 2 birds, 1 stone. Combat and a progression of the story. Meanwhile, you have an ambush. An ambush flips the script by letting the enemies take the initiative.
An ambush immediately presents a story to the players. You're flat-footed. You don't know what's going on, and crucially, you're about to find out. A good ambush presents a narrative hook, a dramatic question. What happens next?
Imagine an arrow flying out of nowhere, striking the barbarian, and suddenly the party is under attack from multiple directions. The chaos creates a sense of danger and unpredictability. An ambush asks the inevitable question, however, how did the enemy know that they were there? As a GM, asking this is also progressing the story. Have the players been spied on? Did they stumble into enemy territory? Why did the enemy think they stood a chance against this party in the first place? Even more fascinating is asking how they prepared as ambushers. Do they know who the threat is? Do they intentionally trip the barbarian so they can rush past and attack the spellcasters? Suddenly, what are weak enemies are suddenly extremely effective tools that informs the players that the monsters in this world are tactical, especially if you use monsters who feel as if they shouldn't have been this tactical. This then leads them to ask, who coordinated the attack? Is there a larger foe at play who's directing them?
It looks like the Sand People did this all right. Look, there's gaffy sticks, bantha tracks. It's just, I've never heard of them hitting anything this big before.
They didn't, but we are meant to think they did. These tracks are side by side. Sand People always ride single file.
But what happens when the players are the ones springing the trap? Mystic Arts calls this the targeted strike, describing it as a moment when the players feel smart and in control, like they're punching above their weight.
But what happens when the players get the drop on the enemy? Well, you're thinking of the targeted strike, which is a lovely gift to give your players. Octavia the Paladin spots the enemy she's been tracking for a week. Argos the Stormwielder, a towering cyclops with a magic battle axe, and with him is his warband of elite ogres and goblin minions. Only, Argos hasn't seen our heroes yet. Neither have the ogres or the goblins. They're just sitting around a campfire unaware of the heroes, plotting the destruction of a nearby town and drinking to the occasion. Tomorrow morning they destroy this town unless you can get the drop on them tonight. Octavia instructs the party to prepare. They cast preparation spells, drink potions they've been hoarding, coat their weapons with that wyvern poison they found in the dungeon a few miles back, and then they prepare a volley of ranged attacks. It's going to be fantastic. A targeted strike allows your players to feel in control.
Now, as a GM, ask yourself, how do the enemies react to an ambush themselves? This is honestly largely both a tactical move and a storytelling device. If the players automatically go for the spellcaster, what if the enemy barbarian reacts in desperation? Seeing the spellcaster downed, of course, he goes into a rage, but you describe it as harsh, guttural, and full of sorrow. Well, look at that. We know the barbarian likely had feelings of some kind for the spellcaster now. That alone tells the players much more about this group than they had known before, and again, it progresses the story. Not only this, you can ask, is their target isolated, or is the attack likely to alert a larger force? As the players execute their plan, use the NPC's reactions to provide answers and new questions. Perhaps an ogre escapes and screams the name of somebody as they flee, hinting at a more powerful enemy behind the scenes. Maybe the goblin minions, instead of fighting to the death, surrender and plead for their lives, revealing a more sympathetic motivation as the ogres threaten them with violence if they do not get up and stand to fight. There's so much more you could explore with these types of encounters. But sometimes it's not about a few well-placed enemies, but instead an overwhelming number.
Let's say you're 13th level then, and this army of goblin minions aren't much of a threat. Then you're dealing with a horde of bad guys. Not just a large skirmish or a fight with lots of bad guys, but a huge fight with hordes of monsters flooding the battlefield. 60 goblins come along and you're fighting them all. Fights like this aren't about being in mortal danger, they're about resource management.
The party must decide how much they want to expend versus how much they need to save for battles ahead in these scenarios. And you have to ask, why is the Horde attacking? Are they just a mindless force driven by hunger or orders? Just describing the basics of how they attack can go a massive way in explaining this. If they're coordinated, this is an assault with likely a single intention. However, if they're ravenous or bloodthirsty, the players can assume it is one driven by hunger or desperation, not organization. Or maybe the Horde isn't even that full of intent, instead just attacking the players to get out of the way. It's trying to get the players to move so it can go past them because something far larger is behind.
Hey, you saved us, sucker!
No, they were trying to get away from something.
Perhaps as the players cut down the waves of attackers, they find sigils marking the Horde as part of a larger enemy. Or they capture a wounded foe who reveals a desperate motivation, protecting their families from an even greater threat. By weaving these elements into the Horde encounter, the fight becomes more than just a cinematic set piece. It becomes a storytelling moment which has clues to progress the story forward, so even after the combat encounter, the players immediately have questions they want answered to continue moving forward to find out more about the story. Next is the Elite Team. An Elite Team encounter is the opposite of the Horde. Here, the party faces a handful of powerful, specialized enemies.
A handful of powerful, named villains with a large variety of abilities, obvious class roles, and legendary powers. That's an elite team. This encounter is built up over multiple sessions. These elite villains might have already shown up as boss fights in the past, or maybe terrifying NPCs that have threatening dialogue with the players. NPCs who praise the arch-villain of the campaign.
What makes an Elite Team particularly effective is the way it inherently invites questions that can drive the narrative forward. You gotta ask yourself, why is this team here? Who brought them together? Are they mercenaries working for gold, zealots fighting for a cause, or loyalists to a greater villain? The answers to these questions can ripple out through the larger world and story. Perhaps a necromancer yells, "Protect the artifact at all costs," hinting at a valuable MacGuffin nearby. Or the ranger cries out, "The master won't forgive us if we fail," revealing a larger power that's behind their actions. Perhaps the bruiser hesitates before attacking, their loyalty shaken by something the players say, therefore creating an emotional connection to this group that wasn't there before combat. See, these encounters aren't just about the combat itself, they're about the intrigue, the narrative threads that they leave behind. When your players walk away from the Elite Team encounter, they shouldn't just feel relief from surviving, they should have new leads, new enemies, or new mysteries to unravel. Every single combat encounter should inform the larger story and have them asking more questions and a goal to go pursue. Just because they beat the enemies doesn't mean they don't have something else that they do need to pursue at this point, because they need to know what's happening, what's going on, and what's occurring so that they can find out the larger story. A combat encounter is just another frame to help move the story forward so the players are invested. And you could do this in a lot of different ways, leading to the next type of combat encounter. Because sometimes your players just want to feel powerful.
Sometimes your players really want to be reminded of how much they kick ass. Give them that joy. Have your high-level party be threatened by some roadside bandits only to send them packing. Have a goblin boss threaten to tear the party limb from limb only to be subsequently crushed.
Mystic refers to this as a stomping ground, or a reminder of how much the players just want to kick ass. Honestly, this one is great for one particular use case, demonstrating character growth. Nothing is more fun than seeing an absolute beatdown after a training arc, a demolition after a time skip, or a rematch against what was a previously dangerous foe that now the party has far surpassed. Use this to add contrast to where the players came from, and more importantly, show where they are now.
Enough! You are all of you beneath me. I am a god, you dull creature.
We're at the end of the adventure. Everything we've done so far was in service to getting us to this moment. It should be the most dramatic, the most deadly, the most insane thing you've done so far. I think it's okay for PCs to die in boss battles. I certainly have never minded being killed in a boss fight.
Boss battles are the culmination of all the questions raised in prior encounters. This is not where the players ask, why are we fighting? But instead, they finally have answers to everything they've been looking for. Why did that necromancer send the elite team? What was the horde protecting? Why did the ambushers risk everything to attack the party? During the battle, ensure these answers unfold organically. Perhaps the Dragon Slayer contains a mural detailing an ancient pact with a greater evil. Or maybe the Lich's legendary actions involve summoning shadows of fallen foes, forcing the players to face memories of past encounters and understand with context now. The answers to these questions should enhance the stakes, not resolve them entirely. It should leave threads for future arcs, don't get me wrong, but it should satisfy the immediate story. By the end of the boss battle, the entire party should feel confident that they have the answers that were built up by all the rest of the combat encounter's questions. They should feel like they have reached the conclusion of this mystery. And then finally, the puzzle encounter. As Mystic Arts notes,
some fights aren't really fights, they look like fights. We roll initiative, we take damage, cast spells, take turns, blah blah blah. There might be monsters in there, or there might be elements of danger that's solved by fighting, but this encounter is really more like a puzzle.
These encounters challenge the players to think beyond their weapons and spells, often involving environmental hazards or unique mechanics. And yeah, these are just cool. I like them. I do them a lot in my games. I really think it's fun to add a very unique encounter where there's a very specific solution that needs to occur. And you wanna know why I like doing that? Because my players always find a different solution. And that's fun. It's really fun to create this very unique puzzle that has a very specific solution that they have to solve, and they just find out something else. Like, there's nothing more exciting for the players or the DM at that point, because now I get to have an encounter I wasn't expecting, super fun, and they get to feel like they outsmarted me. It's a good time. You could do so much stuff with this, but ultimately I say just go watch any anime where they had to come up with a clever solution to defeat the enemy, and there you go, there's your puzzle encounter. So ultimately there's so many ways to run combat encounters, but I really think that they should drive the narrative forward by asking questions and then eventually answering those questions. Every combat encounter should ultimately involve two questions. You as the GM asking why it's happening, and the players as players asking what it means. Those two things will drive so much forward and make combat one of the most fun and crucial parts of your game as a whole. So go out into the world and make it your own, you beautiful bastards. Don't forget to play your role. And again, my wife did leave the room. She keeps leaving the room when I record. So I have no one to do the call to action. So do the likes and the subscribes. Ah, great.